Hello, everybody. I'm Dr. Margaret Rutherford. Dr. Margaret is just fine with me, and I'm delighted to be here with you today on the Mighty because there's several reasons. I love being here every month anyway, but actually, the reason why I chose the topic I did, grieving and challenging and handling your mental illness, is because within the last 4 to 5 weeks. And we're also going to talk about COVID and grieving in the time of COVID. And not only have I had a sudden death in my family, but I have had COVID. So, hey, Anne. So, Anne's from my hometown, and we've known each other a long time. So, I've had some personal experience with this time around, and will be anxious to hear what you're experiencing and what you are going through. Hey, Sydney, good to see you. Hi, James. Hi, Amanda. Hey, Monica. Thank you. Thank you. I look at myself, I look a little pale still, I think. But anyway, let me tell you a little bit about me while people are getting on. I'm Dr. Margaret Rutherford. I have written a book called Perfectly Hidden Depression. I have a podcast, the Self Work podcast, that I absolutely love doing. Hey, Nikki, Laura. Hi, Michelle. Um, and I love doing these mental health on the mighty lives because I just love our talking together, and it's real time, and you can ask me a question and I can do my best to answer it. I've been in practice now, I cannot believe it, almost 30 years. Not quite, 29. And so I really I'll talk to you about what I know about, but I'm eager to hear what you know about as well and what your experience has been. Oh, Sally, that's great. Checked out my book from the library. Oh, it's in the library. When it first came out, I went to the Barnes& and Noble here locally, and there were just 2 copies, but I took a picture, so, uh, it's nice, and I don't know if you could find it there now, but at least when it was first published, it was there, so thank you. So I hope it does you some good, and we'll love to hear from you. Um, Hold on, and we see somebody. Sarah, well, I was dealing with a pandemic personally before the pandemic even hit, so I'd be curious to see what you advise to people like that were already at rock bottom. Okay, so you mean you were dealing with a mental health pandemic? Yes, we're going to talk about that because I think, Sarah, that as you well point out, that everybody's really experiencing now. This pandemic has hit uh, in the middle of everybody's lives. I mean, that anything, deaths happen like that, births happen like that, funerals and weddings, and you never know where you're going to be in your life, and you're hit by something very happy, something to be celebrated, but also something that's really difficult. And so I think that in trying to balance those things out, that it's really important to do several things, which we're going to talk about today. Most of this, we're going to be talking about grieving and then how to manage specific mental illnesses as a part of that. If you have other questions or comments, in fact, Sarah, I would love to know what you mean more by that you were already rock bottom, because that can mean a whole lot of things to someone like me. Um, Hi, Anne, Jillian, Sarah, um, James. It's been 15 years since my mother passed today. I know what that feels like. Well, I don't know what your grief feels like, but it's about the same period of time for my mom and dad. And so this is maybe a very hard day for you, James. I'm sorry. I'm glad you said something about it. Um, so I think that um, honoring your mother and in a way that means something to you on today or this week or sometime is a really good idea, so that you have a chance to, if you had a good relationship with her. Um, and so I think that, it's just important to honor her. Eva, my mental health got really bad, but I'm dealing with a spousal affair. Okay. Well, and Camera, can you save Sarah's comment because she's following up? Um, Please. Gosh, affairs can be so very difficult, and there are all kinds of. You can get depressed. You can get, um, y- you know, it can be horrible, especially if, there's not only the destruction of trust, but there is deceit on top of that. I mean, like there's not apology. There's maybe the affair is still going on and there's deceit there. It really depends so much on how your partner handles what they've done and how to, if they have appropriate remorse and if they have, if you go into therapy. I mean, I've done therapy with lots of couples where there's been an affair or affairs. And the good news is that it can get better, but it takes very hard work on both people's parts. So obviously, you can, if you're already have depression in your life, then you can struggle to hold on to your stability when all of that is happening. Um, so let's see. Can you bring up Sarah's comments, please, Camera? Thank you. Well, I've been diagnosed since my dad shot himself in the head 20 years ago. I've dealt with PTSD, manic depression, bipolar anxiety. This goes on. And they even said I had a personality disorder there was non-specific. Whew. I've also been left with a mentally ill mother and a completely psychotic sister has failed due to alcohol and drugs. Okay. Wow, Sarah. And I can see from your picture that you have a smile on your face. So that's, I'm sure that's hard to slap on. Anytime a parent dies by suicide, takes their own life, then there are all kinds of things that can be brought up. There can be such obviously a sense of abandonment. You can be angry, all the parts of grief that there can be, with this added facet of knowing that they were struggling with something that perhaps no one knew they were. Um, my book on perfectionism talks a lot about when suicide is something that no one knows. But it may be that your father, I mean, it sounds like there's a lot of mental illness in your family, and maybe, your father was known to be depressed or something, but still, that doesn't take away this sense of, oh, you have to struggle with this sense of permission, this sense of, rejection. Although I will say that a really good article that I just read, in fact, there are several points of several articles I've read, is that, um, it's often the decision to die by suicide is about wanting the pain to end. It's like there's a interruption of this idea that your life could also end. It's almost as if you don't have a sense of the reality of that. You just need the pain to end. And that's what often it can be. But also impulsivity, feeling like a burden, and there's some other factors that can lead to suicide. So I'm so sorry that happened, and then you have these other issues. It, Sarah, I also my first marriages were. There was a lot of alcohol and abuse, substance abuse, and it was a part of a chaos that I was creating early on in my life, and yet, I'm happy to tell you I will celebrate my 31st anniversary this September. So hopefully, if you can learn from those kinds of choices that have been horrible for you, um, it's just it sounds like there are a lot of things in your life that are not going well, and so grieving in the midst of that is very when you've got all this chaos around you, and we'll get to some points on how to do this. Carolyn, I lost my 24-year-old nephew in a plane crash. He was the only child. And Camera, can you get Mert's comment too? The only grandchild and the only future for our family. It's been 3 years, but still feels so new. Carolyn, I'm just so sorry. And then, it sounds like COVID came right after that. So you had this tremendous grief, and then you were hit with COVID, which if you're for like a lot of people, I mean, not everyone, but there are a lot of people who then chose to isolate, or certainly they didn't go out. They weren't with family. They couldn't seek out family, just togetherness, in order for support. And so I think that makes it doubly hard. And obviously, a plane crash is a very sudden death, very unexpected death. And when that happens, the grieving is different. Again, My sister-in-law was much older, but we lost her suddenly about 5 weeks ago now. Actually, 4 weeks ago. I just looked at the date. And that kind of shock was hard. You just felt like you at first were in slow motion almost, or going at a really high speed. You didn't really know what to feel. It was very difficult. It's only now beginning to sink in, and so I'm sure with someone who's 24 that has really been a lot. And even like you say, 3 years. What people tell me and what I've experienced myself about grief is that the first year seems like the hardest, but actually the second year may even be harder because people have sort of moved on and they've forgotten. Again, I think with COVID happening, a lot of people who are grieving have felt less support than normal because people are out of the habit of seeing one another and checking in with one another because of the fear of the pandemic. And so I hope that you've reached out to other people when you've needed to, and that you're surrounding yourself with some support. Could we have Mert's comment, please? What do you think we should do when suicidal ideas or hurting yourself arise after the loss? Well, my first thought is to definitely seek help, because often when someone has died by suicide, again, these sort of suicide loops can happen. It all of a sudden becomes more realistic that that's a choice that you could make, or if it's a family member, especially, or someone your age, you almost feel as if you have permission. Um, and Mert, I can't see how old you are, but if you're an adolescent or a young adult, suicide is now the fourth leading cause of death in people from the ages of 14 to 25, I think. It's the second or third leading cause of death for especially men age 40 to 45, and it's really high for women age 50 to 55. It is the 10th uh, reason for death in the United States. It ranks 10th. So it is something that should be taken very seriously. And I would recommend, of course, going to a therapist that you trust to talk about that. A lot of people don't realize that you can go to a therapist and talk about wanting to die, and you're not going to be stuck in a hospital somewhere, unless you have an imminent plan. All right. If you have an imminent plan, yes, that should happen and needs to happen, because you need to be at least in a place where you can stay safe until they get you stabilized and you can get help you need. But, um, and then again, I think in the midst of COVID and the pandemic, there's so many people that, and especially if you disagree about vaccinations or not getting vaccinated, then some of the people that can be been already so much conflict with that you'll feel less likely, whatever side of the fence you're on, to reach out to those people. You feel somehow alienated from them. So I hope those ideas are helpful. Nolan, I've suffered depression since 2009, was diagnosed in 2010. I almost lost my life in 2009 when I was hit by a semi. Oh my God. I was parked on the shoulder of, oops, I was part of the shoulder of an interstate. He wasn't paying attention to me. He hit me. Oh my Lord. At 60 miles per hour. It's amazing you're alive. I spent years trying to be myself again. I'm not, far from it. I'm a completely different person. Ended my marriage, but for the better. He became abusive. Lots of family and friends. I don't have lost a lot of family and friends. I don't have very many friends. Um, he came out as a non-binary pansexual. Okay. Wow. That's a lot in a 10-year period of time. I don't mean to be, um, what's the word I'm looking for? Discounting, or, I mean, everything you just mentioned, from the being hit and all that trauma, the head trauma, the body trauma, and you're going through this, realization of who you are, and you end a marriage, and then you lost friends. I mean, that is tremendous trauma, Nolan. So I hope you do have a therapist. Again, I think that, I'm only seeing people virtually. And it's not just since I got COVID myself, but the numbers here in Arkansas are very, very high or very low. However, COVID is very high, and so I haven't been seeing people. And people could say, "Well, I don't want to do virtual therapy," but when you need therapy, whether it's virtual or not. So I would highly recommend that you, if you haven't already done it, and I hope you have a therapist that knows a lot about coming out, like, in the non-binary pansexual way. And so I hope they can really help you. Um, Whit Downing, I'm 25, diagnosed with autism and depression. My grandma passed away about a month ago, and my grandpa is receiving hospice care. It's hard to be at his house without my grandma being there, but I'm glad for the time I get to still have with him. Whit, um, I'm so sorry about your grandmother. And again, as we've been stressing, let's talk about, trying to grieve in the midst of a pandemic. And now you've got your grandfather who is also ill. Although I'm a firm believer in hospice, um, I think it's the kind way to help people go and to make sure they go with as the least pain that they can. I want to talk a little bit about grieving and then what can happen when you have mental illness, because frequently when we grieve, then we are going to be around. If there's a funeral, if there's a memorial, there's usually a lot of family interaction, or friends from our past will contact us. And I do think you have to be very careful if you have sexual abuse in your history, emotional abuse, physical abuse. You're going to get triggered when you go back into those environments, whether you go back for an actual physical funeral or memorial service or whatever, or whether you just have contact with all these people again. And you also have, you may have seen people who haven't known what your path has been. They don't know that you've been depressed. They don't know that you have PTSD. They don't know that, you can get psychotic or you have dissociation. They don't know any of that. And they'll say, well, they'll ask you quote unquote innocent questions, and you really don't know how to answer them. Maybe you're estranged from family, but you weren't estranged necessarily from the person who died. So there are a lot of things to consider. How are you going to react if you go to the funeral? How are you going to react to the place, being in the place that maybe your abuse happened, or maybe you have some PTSD. Maybe it wasn't within your family, but it was in your hometown. So I do think some real preparation for that. I have people practice what they're going to say, where, if they've been struggling with a severe depression, but they don't necessarily want to open up about that, they just say, well, things like, um, I've had a rough year, or I've had a rough 5 years, but I'm getting back on my feet, or just something to, answer the question, what have you been doing for the last 5 years? And that you can just say, it has not been an easy time, but, rather than opening yourself up and being very vulnerable, I don't think that's helpful. Um, so anyway, I think that's something. In fact, uh, okay, Penny Wooten Nestor, I left a message and comments up above if you got to see them. I did not. I'm extremely overwhelmed and I do receive therapy. Can we go back up to Penny's comment? I'm dealing with a DD and mentally ill family member that I'm the caretaker for. She's 36 but 14 in the mind. She will be a child forever. Her outburst of violence is hard sometimes, but I'm handling it. Gosh, you're handling it for 20 years. Wow, Penny. I'm 48, taking care of a lot of things. I have a small business, so does my husband, and I run both businesses. Our daughter is in the military, and we are estranged because of issues with her controlling husband, and she's cut herself off from family and our grandchildren. Oh, wow. Um, hmm. Sometimes I hear y'all stories, and I have such admiration for your courage, such true admiration for your courage. Um, we all have pain, but and I don't think it's very helpful to compare. Is my pain worse than yours, or is my pain not so bad? I mean, pain is pain, but obviously you've had a lot to deal with in your life. And once again, I see in your picture that you're smiling. So, you've had just, you weren't standing in the line when the powers that be passed out a happy family or a great family. Mental illness runs in your family that often can create incredible havoc. And you sound more like you are sort of the resilient person in the family. And so a lot of times the resilient one can get overwhelmed. You get tired of doing what you do well. And so, I don't believe self-care is about massages or getting your nails done. I believe self-care and and you're obviously someone who needs it from time to time, is it just has to be good enough for you. But it's about, um, you are grieving. You're just not necessarily death, but you're grieving the kind of a relationship you wanted with your daughter, that, this person that's now 36, but uh, 14 in her cognition. So, that's a lot of grief. And I think that if you journal, if you do take care of yourself as much as you can, exercise can really help. Um, Therapy can obviously, I think you said you were in therapy, so that's good. And I hope that you have a, uh, um, I hope you have somebody, sorry, something caught my eye. Um, I hope that's a supportive relationship. Becca, Karen, you have trauma. Just because it is as bad in your mind, you have real trauma. Trauma is trauma. Stay strong. Your life matters. I'm not sure who she's referring to. Um, oh my gosh, I've been wanting to die since I could think and feel. Always been rejected for being emotional. Was adopted at birth and at 10, and was put into care until I was 16. I've had to get through it all on my own. No, you can't, because I'm not sure what that means, because then they treat you like shit when you don't know how to help yourself. But I don't matter because I don't have any tragic story accent for being alone. Always attract narcissists. 30, lost everything to my narc ex, including my children that I raised along with him. Well, Karen, um, that kind of chronic feeling of a welcome death is obviously very troubling. Um, you were adopted already, which can have a lot of joy and affirmation around that topic. But then when it sounds like it didn't work out, you were put into foster care. Um, that's a lot to handle, and I'm sure you know that. In fact, whoever just said it's a whole lot, trauma is trauma. Excuse me, burp. Trauma is trauma. Was trying to remind you of that. Um, I'm not so sure who's treated you badly, because you don't have a tragic story accent. I'm not sure what that means, because you do have a lot of tragedy in your life. And if unfortunately, if you've attracted narcissists, you must be someone, or you certainly could be someone, who takes way too much responsibility and takes on a lot of blame. So what I would do would be try to work on that, um, and try to see yourself as someone who, you can grieve, but at the same time, you haven't created a lot of these things. Now, maybe in choosing, you can laugh occasionally if it's barely funny, but if you have a bad picker, but it sounds like you had children with this man, and so it goes much deeper than that. Um, so again, I hope that maybe your community has some kind of community health center or something that could help you. I know that I volunteer at a community health center, and um, I hope that you can do that. Rick, I lost my father 20 years ago. The grief goes nowhere, but my healing has been real individual. Hi, Rick. Um, there's an interesting podcast called Terrible Thanks for Asking. And I haven't listened to it much, but I did listen into a couple of episodes and I really like it. The podcast host has actually also written a book on her journey with grief. I also just read a book and actually interviewed the author of a book called Black Widow, and she talks a lot about her experience with grief. And she said to me something. She said, it's like grief breaks your mind. It breaks your heart, but it also breaks your mind. And what the host of Terrible Thanks for Asking said, I hate it when people say, I've got to move on. I've got to move on, because you don't move on, but you move forward. So I think both these people are stressing that there's nothing that can take away grief. It happened. It was awful. It was shitty. It hurt. It still hurts. But I concerns me somewhere your grief goes nowhere. I'm hoping that maybe you could feel as if that grief is there, but that you've also moved forward. So I'm not sure your healing has been real individual. I hope that that means you have done something like that. Michelle, I just lost my boyfriend to liver cancer 2 months ago. I've been crying every day. He was in hospice care and I really do miss him. It's really going to be tough through the grieving process. You bet it is, Michelle. I'm so sorry. And 2 months is not any time. You know, i- with liver cancer, I would imagine, although obviously I don't know how long you had to prepare for his death. And so there probably was some anticipatory grieving. Depending on how sick he was, though, that might have gone fairly quickly. I don't know. But there is what's called anticipatory grieving. You, I would write a lot. I would think about this aspect of moving forward, although obviously that is going to affect your life for a long time. Um, if you've been crying every day, I'm not too alarmed by that after 2 months. Um, if in another 2 months or 3 months you're still crying every day, then you could have what's called a complicated grief process going on. Um, and it's hard to make that distinct from depression. So, I would definitely get into maybe a grief group of some kind. There are a lot of those now virtually, but locally you can also get some help there. And I think that can be helpful because you're getting support for your own grief while you're actually watching other people grieve and try to, as we were saying, move forward with that. Um, yes, Billiken, thanks for asking. It's really good. Um, a lot of y'all are talking to each other, and that's wonderful. AJ Cole, that's very understandable. You have to keep yourself safe in every aspect. My son, my son was same on his deployment. It's very secretive, but I understand. I understood. I'll keep you in my prayers. I don't know what AJ Cole said, but it sounds like you're in the. Actually, I'm a female in the military. I don't use my legal name because of what I do in the military. Thanks for airing this video. I see a lot of soldiers who have mental health issues, and they're told that getting help for mental health is a sign of weakness. Please hit this target. Mental illness is not a stigma. Boy, you betcha, AJ. Um, I actually did an interview on my podcast with Dr. Shauna Springer. I think I have her book right here. I do. It's called Warrior. And she talks a lot about how it is not, people say, oh, it must be PTSD from the things you see in the military and the things you experience. But what I learned from her, and have not worked with many people in the military, um, just a handful over the years, but she said it's really, you can have survivor's guilt. You can have so much shame and guilt over just the very fact that you walked out alive and they did not. And so, maybe you can, some of the things you did or saw, you have to work through, but actually, so much more of it is a personal journey through some of that. And I loved her book. I loved talking to her. Um, the book might be helpful to you or your friends. Again, it's called Warrior by Dr. Shauna Springer. And she's called Doc Springer by the military because she's so well respected and loved. Hello, Dr. Margaret. My father passed away almost 5 years ago. I haven't really expressed my grief since then, except for sometimes when I cried in random moments. What can I do to help myself express this grief? I think it is buried in me. Hi there. Um, I guess it's Sai. Sai. It's a beautiful name. Yes, you can bury grief. grief, like any emotion, you can keep it analytical. You can you can be very task oriented, like you throw yourself into doing something with their belongings or setting up a scholarship fund in their name, or um, whatever you're doing, even in 4 years, to honor whatever relationship you had with them, and you can forget your own grief, or you can take care of it or channel it by doing these tasks about. And then of course we can all get very, very distracted by just raising our families and work and all that stuff. So you can not give yourself time to grieve. And certainly I've had people say, I think if I started crying, I'd never stop. Um, I mean no disrespect by that, but by this, but I do think that um, hold on, I'm just reading a note from camera. Um, uh-oh, I just left. Hold on. Oh, there I am again. Um, I think that it's so important to try to get quiet with emotions. And so if you're really distracted, I would take a weekend or a day or an hour to just get very quiet. Listen to some music that might help you gain access to those feelings. Again, I think sometimes if you write them down, your emotion will come. So all those things can help you. Okay. Um, is there a connection between grief and then the sense of abandonment? Thanks, Doc. You're sure welcome. And can we pick up Laura's comments? I had 2 comments up top, just curious, 'cause Laura, I'll get to you next. Of course. You know, I remember well working with a woman whose husband had been killed in just a random car accident, and she was very angry with him and felt very abandoned by him. Now, he didn't choose to be in an accident, but grief has a lot of anger or sense of abandonment or disappointment or fear, or it's not just sadness. It's all kinds of feelings. And even if the person who died didn't die by suicide, certainly when someone dies by suicide, it's very normal to feel abandoned. But even more natural deaths, can have those feelings and almost be angry with them that they died. And again, with COVID and COVID deaths, um, again, not don't want to get into the vaccination, non-vaccination issue here, but if you differed from the person that died, you can have a sense of anger, or you can have you can have all kinds of feelings about um, uh, something that was, that you, I mean, when you think someone died from lung cancer and they smoked for 40 years, or they had something to do with their own death, then you can certainly struggle with a sense of abandonment as well. But I know well that, people's addictions can be very, very, very strong, and their belief systems can be very entrenched. And so it's helpful to at least understand that, and to try to we're all human beings, and sometimes we're irrational or we feel invincible. So that's difficult. Can we pull up Laura? I've just had too many losses over the last year. I don't think I gave myself the time to grieve. I also started trauma therapy weekly for childhood neglect and medical trauma I experienced, and I don't have good in-person support. Um, well, it sounds like you almost have things in your present that you, need your attention, but you at the same time you're doing this work on childhood trauma. Um, what I might do, um, or might suggest you do, is talk to your trauma therapist and say, I'd like to do some of this work, but I've really also got to grieve in my present. And um, maybe we can find a place to hit the pause button. You don't have to just keep going and keep going and keep going. If there are things you need to grieve that are more recent losses, um, will their past affect the way you grieve those? Of course it will. Of course it will. But at the same time, do you have the capacity to do both that work all at once? Often not. So, sometimes, in fact, I right now have a patient who's also a doctor and whose practice is being overwhelmed with COVID, and she has been doing some trauma work about her past, and she's had to just kind of say, "I can't do any more right now. My plate is full, and I have to, focus on just getting through my day right now." And so, sometimes you just have to work with a therapist and say, "I want to really grieve these deaths as I need to, and I feel like my work in the past is pulling me away." So, your past will be there, but again, you know, if your therapist feels strongly that, this is something that you need to do now for some reason, I'm not I that's just my thought. I mean, I'm not talking with you and knowing what you're working through. So, um, anyway, I think that, uh, it's important that you have that conversation, though. Rick, addictions, that was a curveball. I'm not real sure. I think addictions can often lead to a sense of someone not, taking care of themselves, and it's kind of a many addictions are a slow way to die, whether it's alcohol or any kind of drug or something like that. It's certainly a way of thinking like that. James, I don't know the answer to your question. Becca, grief isn't something that you just get over. However, it is something to get through. You're exactly right. You're exactly right. And, some of you have mentioned deaths from COVID. Um, that can have, I think, its own sense of just angst and emptiness. I mean, people anywhere running the gamut from elderly people to now, people who are children dying from COVID. And so it can feel like, why am I living? And why was that person living in this time that this happened? It feels unfair. And yet, people who, I mean, we can't choose when we live. And so, um, we're all facing things and have faced things and will face things. This certainly has a lot of cultural components of grief. And uh, as I've heard somebody say, we're all in the same sea, but just some of us have better built boats. And so I think many people are trying to help the people that their boats aren't as sturdy, but there are people all over the world who are suffering, gosh, such tremendous loss. Okay, let's see. Um, let's see. Somebody maybe who hasn't we haven't addressed their question. Um, Rick, may your suffering turn to just a struggle if you're reading this. Yes, that's a great thought, Rick. Um, let me see. Well, Nolan, I think since childhood I've been constantly dealing with grief of one sort or another. It really goes away. Bipolar disorder is so hard to understand. I think that is what's part of the issue. I've researched it, but still don't understand it. For me, it's the worst of my diagnosis. I'm wondering if that's why I get these funks when something changes. You know, eh, there are a lot of people who have borderline personality disorder that are on the spectrum. So not all borderline personality it looks the same or sounds the same or whatever. But what probably is a fairly common facet of borderline personality disorder is that you're very governed by your emotions, and it's hard to learn how to um, hook your mind up to those emotions and that pain, so that you begin to make better choices about how to deal with pain rather than following your impulse and then perhaps creating more chaos in the process. Um, I don't know if you've tried dialectical behavior therapy. There are actually workbooks that you can do if you can't afford real therapy, but you can actually go to somebody who's trained in DBT, and that can be very helpful. Sarah, I would like to know how to build a new relationship with someone new when you are surrounded by nothing but baggage and stuff in the past. Could you absolutely? Can you answer that one? Well, um, I think you can do the best you can to recognize how that baggage has affected your choice of this person, um, and how your past may be influencing even the way you both approach the relationship and what you begin to the story you tell yourself about the relationship. What I mean by that is, um, relationships they don't fix things in your life that have been broken before. You have to heal yourself, and then hopefully your choice of a relationship partner will be someone, at least to a certain extent, healing yourself. And then you have to hopefully you will make a better choice of partner. Someone who has done his or her own or their own feeling work and emotional pain work, to where you're not looking for some sort of savior in your relationship, because that can be really problematic. Um, Billiken, grief is a heavy beast. I feel much of my struggles really boil down to grief. I grieve myself, meaning I grieve my healthy self. I have a chronic illness. I know I'm not alone in this, yet my individual grief circle is so much. I beat myself up for not just doing the best I can. Well, maybe you are doing the best you can. Um, there's also something, I don't know why this came to mind, but there's something called um, transgenerational trauma. And I don't know if you have in your family people who have Holocaust survivors as their family, people who have were the victims of slavery or racism or whatever. They can have this. It's almost a hand-me-down kind of sense of uh, sadness and trauma that can get expressed in different ways. So sometimes um, you have to look at what you're grieving and um, how much of it is something that might have its roots in the past, but seems like it's in the present. But it really sometimes, if you can say, well, this feels a lot like what I grieved 10 years ago, or this feels a lot like what I saw in my mom, or this, it can help you sort of begin to work through it and manage it a little bit better. It's not going to help yourself to beat up yourself. That's shame. And so, um, I think that there's a lot to grieve in life, and then there's also a lot to um, try to focus on that is more positive and can actually help balance out your sense of demoralization or grief or heaviness, as you say. Okay, and let me take one more. Michael, depression anxiety shows up as I am balancing the desire to hang on to memories with the need to not let them rule me. This is, I'm balancing the desire to hang on to my memories, the need to not let them rule me. Um, it sounds as if when you say you want to hang on to your memories, that they're not good memories you're talking about. Um, that it seems important to somehow either have visual reminders of them or remind yourself of those memories. Um, and so I think the question I would ask of you is, what function do you think that's serving? Um, if you're hanging on to them to stay angry, or to stay or you just get sad all the time when you're thinking about them, what would happen if you actually could begin to let them fade? It may be that you feel like those memories defined you in a way that you can't seem to escape. And so the question, if you were sitting in front of me, that I would ask you is, what is there about you, Michael, that is not defined or is not necessarily tied to those memories? And so you can begin to explore and help yourself identify what you've been able to create despite those memories, and or maybe what you learned from those memories. I've had plenty people who are victims of sexual abuse or emotional abuse, physical abuse, mental illness, whatever, and they've said, I'm a more compassionate person because of this, or I don't judge other people as harshly, or whatever. So I think that might could be some helpful questions to ask yourself. Okay, guys. Well, Sydney just said, ever since I was 5 years old, I would sometimes have dreams before people die. I often struggle with guilt, thinking I knew beforehand. Oh goodness. Well, I'm just think about that. If a 7-year-old came up to you now as an adult and said, "I'm afraid, I've had a dream you're going to die," would you say, "Oh, well, I'm going to take that seriously"? I mean, you may have some kind of ability to get in on an energy that right now you don't understand, but that doesn't mean you could have prevented it. Um, that is something that you might feel as if you could, but I, I, I think it probably, if people had been able to prevent that kind of thing from happening, someone would have figured it out by now. So I think that's carrying that. That's not. Uh, I understand the feeling, but I don't think it's backed with real rational thought. Um, so anyway, I hope that's helpful to you, Sydney, that you can begin to just grieve and then not feel guilty. Okay. I'm going to sign off for today. I have a session in another few minutes. Thank you all so much for being here. I'm usually here on the third Wednesday of the month. Thank you so much, Becca. That's very nice. I am going to take care of me. I tell you, I was very touched. I had put on Instagram, not because I really wanted a lot of attention, but because I thought, if people are saying no one's getting COVID that I know, that if I said, well, I have COVID, that someone would know that could happen. Now they know someone that it's happened to. So, but I got an outpouring of real concern and care and support, and that was very, very nice. And you're so welcome for these podcasts. It's something I look forward to every month. I wish I had answers, but I'll try to have ideas and things for you to try here at home, or there at your own home, here in my home. So you're welcome. I'll be back next month. I'm not sure when that is, what that's September. I do know what it is. It's the 15th because I might go on vacation on the 17th. We shall see. Maybe, maybe not. But anyway, I think that's the 15th of September. So, hey, that's my 31st first wedding anniversary. So that'll be good. That'll be kind of fun. Talk to y'all on my wedding anniversary. Maybe we'll talk about anniversaries. Who knows? All right, y'all take care. And it's Suicide Awareness Month. Okay. All right. Well, we certainly have had a lot of conversation here. And so if we need to talk about it again, or we'll touch on something else too. All right. Y'all take care. Thanks to